الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.
اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما. الحمد لله. أعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا، من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له. صلواته وسلامه على رسول الله على أفضل خلق الله وعلى آله ومن والاه. الحمد لله. اللهم إني أسألك فعل الخيرات وترك المنكرات وحب المساكين، إن أردت بنفسك فلسن فاقتلني لك غير ممتون. اللهم افتح علينا حكمتك وانشر علينا رحمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الكرام. Alhamdulillah, in the 145th قاعدة, Sidi Ahmed Zarruq says, لكل بلاد ما يغلب عليها من الحق والباطل، فإذا أردت أن تعرف صالح بلد فانظر بباطل أهلها هل هو بريء منه أم لا، فإن كان بريئا فهو ذاك، وإلا فلا عبرة به. وبحسب هذا فاعتبر في أهل المغرب رقصاء السخاء وحسن الخلق إن وجدت، وإلا فدع. وفي أهل الأندلس كذلك، وفي أهل المشرق الغيرة لله والسلامة الصدر إلى غير ذلك. وقد أشار رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لهذا الأصل فذكر أوصاف البلاد وعوارضها، كقوله في المشرق الفتنة ها هنا، وكذا لنجد وفي الفرس. ولو كان الإيمان بالثريا لأدركوا رجال منهم. وفي أهل اليمن إنهم أرق أفئدة، وفي أهل المدينة إنهم خير الناس، ومع وصفهم الله فيه من قوله يحبون من هاجر إليهم، وما وصلوا به أهل مصر من الأوصاف المذمومة وغيرها التي يبلغ عددها 17 موضعا في كتاب الله. وقال عليه الصلاة والسلام السكينة والوقار في أهل الغنم، والفخر والخيلاء في أهل الخير، والغلظة والجفاء في الفدادين تباع أثناب الإبل والبقر في ربيعة ومطر. وقال عمر في إفريقيا بلاد مكر وخديعة حسب ما ذكره صاحب فتوح الشيخ عنهم. وقال مولانا جلت قدرته لذي القرنين في أهل المغرب الأقصى، إما أن تعذب وإما أن تتخذ فيهم حسنا، فدل على استحقاقهم لكل ما يعاملون به من خير وشر منهم فكذلك، والله سبحانه وتعالى. So this is a very interesting قاعدة about what today we would refer to as stereotypes. So stereotypes emerge out of certain behavioral patterns that people notice in groups of people, other people. And so what happens with a stereotype is because certain qualities manifest in certain peoples, generally people tend to lump all of that group into that category. So stereotypes sometimes can be just false. For instance, like Sa'id Masr, is a good example of just a false stereotype. In Egypt, for the Egyptians, there's some Egyptians in here. In Egypt they make fun of Saidi people because they come from the south, and they're seen as simpletons and country bumpkins. But some of the greatest scholars in the history of Egypt came from Sa'id, and I have several books from the great Sa'idi scholars of Fakihani and Al-Adawi and others. So that's an unfair stereotype. But sometimes stereotypes do have a foundation in behavior, and that's literally what he's alluding to. So he's saying every country has certain qualities of both haqq and batil. So every country has qualities of haqq and batil. So for instance, in America we have a stereotype of Canadians that they're polite. And in Canada you have a stereotype of Americans that they're rude. So sometimes you'll meet Canadians that are rude, and sometimes you'll meet Americans that are polite. So you have to be careful with stereotypes, because if you just assume they're accurate, you can actually just wrongfully, like the inscrutable Asian. This was a stereotype because Asiatic people are very often less prone to, I mean, you can be on an airplane with a European or an American. By the end of the flight, you know how many divorces they've been through. You know how many STDs they've had, and it can be very embarrassing sometimes. This happened to me on more than one occasion where I'm like, I really don't want to know these things about you. So that's a stereotype, though, to say that. But there certainly is a more openness about things that other cultures are very loath to speak about, especially to people they don't know very well. So this is what he's talking about. So he said, and this is a really beautiful point, if you want to know the righteous people of a place, look at the negative qualities of those people in that place and see if that person's free of them. Because that means he's amongst their salihin. So, in certain cultures, I mean, I'll give you one, I won't mention the country, but there's a country where people are really known for tama', like just always wanting to get something from other people, especially monetary. And I was once in Medina, and I saw a very pious-looking man. And he was a sheikh, and he had some students with him. And we started talking, and then I had some money for charity. So I said, I have some money. I want to give you this money, and you can distribute it how you want or use it how you want. So just leave it to your discretion. And he said, Barakallah fikum, and excuse me, please, but I'd rather not. And then he said, but I would like to give you some money. And then he gave me some money, and he said, you can do what you want with it. And I don't know if it was an interesting lesson for me, but, and I don't know what exactly he was saying. He might have been saying that I was being rude or something, I don't know. But the point being that I realized he really was a pious man. Because they say if you want to know somebody, just throw a dirham in front of them. That's an old saying in the Arab tradition. If you want to know somebody, you see how they behave with money. And one of the things that our tradition is very strong about is this idea of iffa. Somebody was once begging, and ilhah is where you keep asking, you don't stop. And so the beggar said to the man, أين ذهب الذين يؤثرون على أنفسهم ولو كان بهم خصاصة? Where are those who used to prefer themselves to others even if they were poor themselves? And the man replied to this beggar that wouldn't let up, ذهب مع الذين لا يسألون الناس إلحافا. They're gone with the people that don't keep asking for because the Quran has those people as well. So begging is something that traditionally there was a group called the Malamatiya, these people that would beg to break their nafs. And I'll give you, in the Mauritanian tradition, and I have a friend who's from a very wealthy family by Mauritanian standard. When he finished his Quran, the sheikh made him go beg with a bowl to a neighboring village. It was very humiliating for him, but he didn't want the pride of memorizing the Quran to enter into his heart, so he wanted to break his nafs. Whether that, some people you'll differ at that, the ulama differed on things like that, but that does exist, breaking the ego. So that's what he's saying. And he said, so if you see that person free of those negative qualities of whatever people they're from, then he's a righteous person. And if he has those negative qualities, he says, فَلَا عِبْرَةَ بِهِ. Don't even waste your time. Because the people that you really want to engage are righteous people, not just average people that don't rise above the negativity of their environments. And that's why when you see people that are known for dishonesty or lying and things like that, and there are people like that, I'm not whole groups, but There are tribes that are known for these type of things. In West Africa, there's some tribes that are known for not being truthful or being treacherous. So if you find somebody from a group that doesn't have those qualities, there's somebody that you want to ask for dua or get to know. And he said, so consider the people of Maghrib, when you find them generous with good character, then you found some. I have to say, Sidi Ahmed Zarruq was really mistreated by the Moroccans. He was a Moroccan himself, so I would take that. The Moroccans I have found are very generous, and generally Moroccan do have good character. But I think that might have been an ouch from him because he really was mistreated by the Moroccans. They kicked him out of Fez for defending the Jews, which people that came after him recognized that he was the right one, and then the other scholars were wrong in that issue. If you see that in the people of Mashriq, al-ghayra lillah wa salamat al-sadr. Now this is a very interesting thing, because he's saying if you see that they have, he's talking now about Eastern Arabs. First one he's talking about Western Arabs. He's talking about Eastern Arabs. If you see they have ghayra for Allah, and they have, good hearts, there's not envy, there's not su'avan. He's saying those are the righteous among them, because there's a lot of su'avan. And he lived with Eastern Arabs. So whether that's true today, I'll leave that up to people to decide for themselves about that. I don't want to stereotype people. My experience generally with the Gulf Arabs in particular has been very positive. A lot of people just trash on them constantly. My own personal experience, some of the best people that I've met come from the Hijaz. I have over almost 40 years of going to the Hijaz, and I've had several really incredible families that I became friends with, and just had very good experience. The same my experience in the UAE when I was a student there. They gave me a scholarship and allowed me to live there and study, and I was an imam for 2 years. So that's been my experience. Other people have different experiences. Rumi tells the story about people that come from China, and they ask them, how was China? And the first one says, it's the land of thieves. I went to the mosque and my shoes got stolen. I went to the hammam, they stole my clothes, and it's the worst place I've ever been. The next one he asked, how? He said, they have the most beautiful women in the world. I've never seen women like that. And then the other one, he asked him, he said, best cuisine anywhere. Food was incredible. Every town has a different cuisine. And then he gets to one, he says, what about you? He says, it's a land of saints. Everywhere I went, I found righteous people. And Rumi says the point of that is that people will tend to go to find what's in their own hearts very often, that it will mirror their own experience. And then he says, the Prophet ﷺ indicated this when he pointed to the east, and he said, al-fitna ha-huna. The fitna is from the east. So this is an indication. There's a hadith which is in Daylami. It's not strong, but it was Iyakum al-Ashqar al-Azraq. And this is where the nation got this idea. Beware of the blonde-haired, blue-eyed one. So I think for most of the southern hemisphere, that's probably reasonably good advice historically. But you can't say that people with blonde hair or blue eyes are devils, because that's not the point. But Imam Shafi'i did mention that also, that he always kind of looked askance. So that's just, it's dangerous to stereotype, like I said, and Imam Warsh was blonde hair and blue eyes. He's one of the great transmitters of Quran. So that should not be taken as a general rule. And then he says about the people of Yemen, the Prophet ﷺ said that they have brittle hearts, al-Iman Yamani. And then also he said about the Persians that if knowledge was in Pleiades, Persians would acquire it. And in the history of Islam, nobody served the religion like the Persians in terms of knowledge. Nobody. I mean, you see Dr. Nasr, he likes to remind us he's a Persian, but he's not making it up. They were Ahl Sunnah until the 17th century, 16th and 17th century, when they were converted by the Safawiya. But originally, the majority of them were actually Sunni Muslims, and there still are Sunnis in the Western province. But the Persians were just incredible in our history. The mathematics, the Arabic language, the science, the astronomy, just stunning contribution. Most of our muhaddithun were Persians. Many of our great fuqaha, Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, it's enough just to have Abu Hamid. So that hadith is an amazing hadith. And then about Medina, إنهم خير الناس, these are the best people. السكينة والوقار في أهل الغنم. Sheep people tend to be humble and are more dignified than cow people. Again, these are hadiths, but the point is, if you study the sheep-cow wars in the United States, it's very interesting that America eats beef, but it could have eaten sheep, because there was huge wars against the sheep farmers and the cattle farmers. And the cattle farmers were so vicious that the sheep farmers lost. So there's, I think, some real truth to this. It's interesting, and no offense to any Anglo-Saxon people, it's interesting they're called beef eaters. Beef, the Prophet never ate beef. Beef is in the Quran because Ibrahim alayhi salam ate beef, but the Prophet alayhi salam said that the meat of beef is a disease. لحوم البقر داء وألبانها شفاء, but the milk is healthful. So the Prophet alayhi salam did not eat beef. Beef hardens the heart physically. So what is it doing to the heart? It's very interesting that beef is eaten so widely in places that you have a lot of belligerence. Where sheep people that eat sheep tend to be a little more tranquil, más tranquilo. So again, don't get this wrong, because we don't want to fall into stereotypes. These are. It's very dangerous to do that. All right. So, but the point is, it's a very interesting qaida in that he's pointing out that there definitely qualities go with people. And then also the Prophet ﷺ said, وَالْغِلْطَةُ وَالْجَفَاءُ فِي الْفَدَّادِينَ تُبَعْ أَذْنَابِ الْإِبْرِ وَالْبَقَرِ فِي رَبِيعَةِ وَمَضَرٍ. The faddad is kind of a brag, somebody who's very loud, and so he's saying that harshness and Jaffa is like a kind of good word for Jaffa. Somebody who's Jaffa. It's literally there's kind of dryness. They're just not, they're not really nice people. They're harsh. So the Prophet said it's in the followers of the camels and cows in Rabi' and Mudar. These are the two great branches of the Arab al-Musta'riba. And then Umar radiallahu anhu said about a certain region in North Africa that there was a place where there was a lot of makr and khadi'ah, trickery and treachery. And then Dhul Qarnayn said about the people of al-Maghrib al-Aqsa, if you punish them or if you do well. In other words, he's saying they deserve both. So he said, this is something, the affair is like that. Anyway, that's a very interesting, for me, qaida. That one of the things in logic that you have is what's called comprehension and extension. It's very useful to know. When you read a hadith about where the Prophet talks about women, it doesn't mean all women. It means some women. It's like a comprehension about certain nature. But there are many women that are far superior intellectually than many men. Historically, women did not study as much as men. Now it's the opposite. In these latter days, women are studying a lot harder than men. They're doing better at the universities all over. This is a global phenomenon. It's not just in the West. It's happening in the Muslim world, and many teachers have noticed this. So, but historically, women were more concerned about just having children and being in a family. Now, people today will say, "Oh, well, that was because it was cultural, and this is basically a kind of it's something that's an artificial construct that these people are socialized into this behavior." But it's a fitrah, so it's a fitrah behavior, and there's still a lot of women that would prefer to do that than to get out and be in the world and things like that. But the barza is somebody who amongst the women, they don't really like being at home domestically, and historically, if they could afford it, they had people to take care of their children. They had wet nurses, and it's all in the books of fiqh. So this is well known in societies. So these things shouldn't, you shouldn't. If you read a hadith about something that troubles you or something like that, if it's a sahih hadith, just be careful, because it's not always. It might not mean you. It's just talking about a general, like these are not meant to be taken, like not all people that raise beef are faddad, but it's saying that you see this in those people very often. So that's important to note. Just in conclusion, is it set up? I just want to do, the last thing that I wanted to do for you to understand something about the nature of the Sharia is very important, is what's known as khitab al-wada' and khitab al-taklif. So khitab al-wada' is it's those things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala places down on the individual. So, for instance, if you have prayer, if you ask an usuli scholar, is prayer wajib? Is prayer wajib? Is prayer, the 5 prayers a day, is that an obligation? A usuli scholar might reply, upon whom? Like, who are you asking about? A child? No. A woman when she's menstruating? No. A woman when she's in nifas? No. Somebody who's being crucified? No. There's a khilaf about that, by the way. But if you can't do wudu or anything, even nakedness, the ulama differed on it. So if they used to steal clothes, so you could be out in the middle of the desert and some brigand stole all your clothes. So, the ulama, some of them said, if you can find mud and cover yourself in mud, then you pray. Some of them said you should pray like sitting down. They talked about these things because they were real situations. Some said if it was nighttime you could pray. If it was really dark and the moon wasn't out, you could pray standing up because of the sitr of the night. But the point is that there is a difference depending on what's known as khitab al-wada'. And this is very important to understand because it relates to the Maqasid in a very deep way. And one of the things that Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayyah argues is that there has been a separation from this discourse of the stipulatory discourse from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the discourse of responsibility. So the khitab is from Allah. He's the one that yukhatibuna. He's speaking to us. So his khitab is either a khitab of wada', he posits certain things, or it's a khitab of responsibility. He's making us responsible for certain things. If it's khitab al-wada', there are 3 aspects to it. The first is called a sabab, which is the reason or the causative factor in a legal ruling. So for instance, reaching puberty is the sabab for the obligation of prayer on a Muslim. Before puberty, it's not an obligation. For dhuhr, and this was something, we have a really wonderful sister who became Muslim. She's a brilliant lady from England. She wrote a book on Jesus. She was actually, I think she was a nun, and she became Muslim. You know, Waris, I think was her name. Huh? Yeah, Ruqayya Waris. I met her a few times, but she's a truly brilliant lady. And she actually wrote a really excellent book on Jesus in Islam. But she said she married a Pakistani, and she got into this big debate with him about, because he was arguing that if you prayed dhuhr 1 minute before it came in, your prayer was invalid. And being the good Christian convert that she was, she just could not accept that. She said, that's crazy. Like God is going to, 1 minute you're praying, so this is something about our religion, that we have these conditions that have to be fulfilled. So there's 360 degrees in a circle. And we're just talking about from Sharia perspective. The sun moves in that circle in a day. The point when it reaches 90 degrees, all right, so you have the plane, right, and then there's the horizon, and then you have that point, it's called Kabad as-Sama. It hits the middle of the sky. That point, right, when it reaches 90 degrees, that is called the Istawa Shams. It will sit for about 4 minutes in Kabad as-Sama. The moment that it moves 1 degree, so now it's at 91 degrees moving towards 180 when it sets. It's at 91 degrees. That moment is a sabab for the wujub of dhuhr. It's a condition. Before that, you can't pray dhuhr. There's a mani'. So the first is called a sabab, which is the causative factor of the ruling. The second is called a preventative, a mani'. It's what prevents the ruling. So before that point, there is a mani' for dhuhr. There is a preventative for dhuhr. You cannot pray dhuhr. It will not be sound. And then you have a shart. All three of these are related. You have a shart, which is a condition. So when people say jihad is obligatory in Islam, that's true. It's a fard to do jihad. But when is the sabab? What are the mawani'? And what are the conditions? What are those that prevent it? What are those conditions that fulfill it? And what are those conditions that make it an obligation? That has to be understood. And that has to be understood in any legal ruling. And this is the job, first of all, of usuli scholars, but it becomes your job in situations. So I'll give you an example. If you have diabetes, and salamukumullah, if any of you have diabetes, and there are probably a few people in here, just statistically, that do. If you have diabetes, it can be very dangerous to fast, especially on very long days. Now you might have light diabetes that's controlled, and so your doctor says you can fast. But you might have diabetes that's not, especially if it's like a type 1. And so the doctor says you can't fast. Your diabetes, normally for you as a Muslim, 5 pillars, and one of them is fasting. But here, you as an individual, there is a mani' preventing you from fasting. So if you fast, you're actually in disobedience if it's going to harm you. Because ad-darar yuzal. Harm is removed. And fasting is harmful for a person. The same is true for children. And I know there's a khilaf about this, but I really prefer the Maliki school on this one. There are other things. I'm not a muta'assib, Maliki. I'm not a fanatic Maliki. There are certain things in other schools that I prefer the other opinions about it. There are certain things in Abu Hanifa school that I definitely prefer over the Maliki school. So I'm saying this not simply because, thanks, that helps. I'm saying this not because I'm Maliki and it's my school. No. Imam Malik considered children fasting to be ta'deeb. It was like torture. Because he did not consider it to be... There's something, and this is another aspect of our religion, which is called the furuq. And Imam al-Qarafi, the great Egyptian scholar from the 8th century, he was the one that really established this science to a very high degree. And he has an important book. He was Maliki, but the book is read by all the madhabs because of its significance. He showed that there are differences that have to be always taken into consideration, the furuq. So with prayer, you're supposed to discipline a child at the sinu tamyiz, right? They should start praying. When they get to 10, you're supposed to discipline them. So before 10, you just tell them if they come, they come. If they don't, they don't. But at 10, you have to start disciplining them to make sure they pray. Malik said you cannot analogically apply fasting to this because all of us have to get used to fasting every year. Whereas the prayer is something you will do every single day for the rest of your life. So it's very important to habituate a child into that. Whereas fasting is not. You'll fast maybe a few days out of the year, but Ramadan comes, all of us, for those first 3 days, especially for coffee and tea drinkers, you just have to suffer the consequences and get used to it. So Malik did not believe that you should fast. Now there are hadith in al-Bukhari that they used to get the children to fast. And the Shafi'i madhab took that. So the Shafi'is encourage prepubescent children to fast to get them used to it. Malik differed on that. And I think we know enough, especially for long days, we know enough. If it's a short day and they're older, like 9 or 10, I think it would be okay if they wanted to. But for long days, their brains are developing and they need glucose. So it can actually be quite harmful, and I think a lot of neuroscientists would agree on that one. So there's a case where you really have to... What's that? Oh, and okay, and so this will work. So what I wanted to do here, so these are flaws. This is a different topic, and I don't want to do this, but I want to explain these flaws that relate to modern Islam that are profoundly impacting us. These were identified by Shaykh Hamza Yusuf. One is what he calls the manhaj al-ijtiza. So ijtiza is where you take parts and not the whole. You don't have a comprehensive view on the Sharia, which is very dangerous because losing a comprehensive view, you begin to think that particulars are universals and they're applied in every situation. If you look at 9.5, which is telling us to fight the mushrikeen wherever they are, that was a very specific reason. They were at war with the pagans, so some of the ulama took from that and they universalized a particular, and then they abrogated other verses. This was a big debate in early Islam. Shaykh Abdullah argues now that debate's over, that the idea that we can go around conquering other countries or something like that was the period of empire for Muslims. But it certainly was not. And Ibn Taymiyyah makes a very, very cogent argument that the Prophet ﷺ had no offensive none. In fact, when he went to Tabuk and found out the Romans weren't amassing an army to oppose him, he just went back. He went back home. He could have invaded Syria. He didn't. So that's one thing, is decontextualizing it. But the other is this disconnect between prescriptive law and stipulative law. So the prescriptive law is what we are told to do. So, for instance, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, establish prayer. That's a hukam of taklif. So you're called a mukallaf. You have the responsibility of praying. But the stipulative law tells you when it's obligatory, on whom it's obligatory, and what are the conditions that fulfill its obligation, and what are the preventatives that will prevent it from being fulfilled. So this is really important to understand because it really helps. So for instance, historically, like the Malikis say, if you reach 12,000 in numbers, you can't retreat from a battlefield. 12,000. Because there's a hadith, Imam Malik relates and others, that whoever reaches the number of 12,000, they will not be defeated for lack of numbers. It's a very interesting hadith because the cohort of the Romans was 12,000. And the Romans were the most effective military force on the planet at the time. So I don't know if the Prophet ﷺ was using that from, but it's very interesting that they share that number, the hadith and that. You cannot ignore the military logistics with the number of soldiers. So if you have swords, like the Mamluks when they went up against Napoleon, and Napoleon had rifles, it's a very different situation. And Muslims don't commit suicide. Suicide is prohibited. لا تقتلوا بأيديكم إلى التهلكة. Don't throw yourselves to destruction. لا تقتلوا أنفسكم إن الله كان بكم رحيما. Don't kill yourselves. Allah is merciful with you. It's prohibited to kill yourself. Even, I've always been against suicide bombing. Now they call it Amali Istishhadiyya, martyrdom operations. But originally it was called suicide bombing. Originally, all the ulama, when it first showed up, the ulama were all against it. Over time, you start seeing capitulation to it. But suicide bombing is one of the worst things that's happened to our religion. It's a totally nihilistic approach. Now, the idea that you can do a mission where it's very, very likely and probably almost certain that you're going to die, that is permitted. And most of the people that have gotten Congressional Medals of Honor were on missions like that. So the American military recognizes, somebody who jumps on a grenade to save the people around him, right? He's not the agent of his death, right? He's sacrificing his life for others, right? That's not the agent of his death. But this idea that you can actually shoot yourself or pull something that blows you up, Muslims would have never in the history of Islam permitted that. It's a very modern fatwa. And I actually read a book that was published by the Kuwaitis on all the fatwas permitting suicide bombing, and I just found them so flawed logically. And there was a lot of emotion in them. And a lot of it had to do with that this is the only resistance that there was not. Well, first of all, the goal of Islam is to actually win. Like in a war, إحدى الحسنيين, like you get one or the other, victory or martyrdom. But when it's just martyrdom, that's called nihilism. That's a meaningless death. It's as simple as that. So, anyway, that's my view. People can agree or disagree. It's up to them. But I'll go to my grave believing that. I've never accepted that. And nobody can find anywhere where I've ever said anything otherwise. In fact, in 1993, I gave a talk, Jihad is the Only Way Out, that was published in 93. And I condemned suicide bombing then, so I've been consistent on that for over 20 years. And then the next is the disconnect between fulfilling commands and prohibitions and consideration of social benefits and harm. So here's the Maqasid, looking at the manzuma of masalih and mafasid. So looking at the consideration of social benefits and harm. And this is extremely important. So, this is a famous image of people looking from different perspectives and not seeing the whole picture. So that's actually from a famous Rumi story, but it's also in the Indian tradition. So Rumi got a lot of stories from the Buddhists. So if you look at dealing with sacred texts in the isolation of other related texts, so in Surah Al-Hijr, it says that the Prophet ﷺ was accused of being Majnoon. Well, the answer doesn't come until Surah Al-Qalam. So from the 6th surah, it comes much later in the Quran. مَا أَنْتَ بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ بِمَجْنُونَ. And so some of our ulama said, you have to see the entire Quran as one surah. You can't decontextualize it. You have to see it as like one chapter. So answers will come later. Here's another example of isolation from other related texts. This hadith is in the Arba'in of Nawawiyah. Now, Imam Nawawi was a Shafi'i scholar. This hadith says, أُمِرْتُ أَنْ أُقَاتِلَ النَّاسَ حَتَّى يَشْهَدُوا أَنْ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهُ وَأَنَّ مُحَمَّدًا رَسُولُ اللَّهِ وَيُقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَيُؤْتُوا الزَّكَاةَ فإذا فعلوا ذلك عصموا مني دماءهم وأموالهم إلا بحق الإسلام وحسابهم على الله تعالى. So I've been ordered to fight against the people. So there's a nas. Until they testify that there is none worthy of worship except Allah and that Muhammad ﷺ is the messenger of Allah, and they establish the prayer and pay the zakat. And if they do, they gain protection from me for their lives and their property, unless they commit acts that are punishable in accordance to Islam, and they're accounting with Allah. Now, the first problem with this hadith is umirtu. He did not say umirtum. Right? So Ibn Abi Jamrah and others said this is from the khasa'is of the Prophet. It does not apply to the rest of the ummah. He did not say umirtum. He said umirtu. I was commanded. The second problem is a nas. Well, actually, the second problem is uqatil, because according to Ibn Abi Jamrah, uqatil is udafi', to defend Islam, but that's a weak ta'wil. For instance, in the prayer, when somebody comes to your prayer, it says that you're supposed to push them, let them know, and if they keep going, فَلْيُقَاتِلْهُ, let him yuqatilhu, which means defend, to ward them off. It doesn't mean to kill them or to fight them. You don't want to do that while you're praying, right? But the word used is فَلْيُقَاتِلْ. It means فَلْيُدَافِعْ. And that's what qital is in Islam. It's difa'. It's to defend. لَوْلَا دِفَعُ اللَّهِ النَّاسَ بَعْضُهُمْ بِبَعْضٍ لَفَسَدَتِ الْأَرْضِ. And then in another ayah, لَهُدِمَتْ صَوَامِعُ وَبِيعٌ وَصَلَوَاتٌ وَمَسَاجِدُ. So that's... and then the third problem is an-nas. Alif Lam is called a definite article, added to ta'rif. In English we call it a definite article. Like you have apple, like an apple, and then you have the apple, right? That's a definite article. Indefinite is in Arabic is dropping the alif lam. And there's different reasons for doing that, right? For ta'meem, for ta'zim, for tahqir. There's different, Arabs do that for different reasons. So in this hadith, what type of article of definition is that? The Arabs use different articles. So for instance, they can use an article for ahad that goes back to you're talking about somebody and then you use that. It can be also for istighraq, to mean all of the people. It can also just mean a specific group of people. So which type of article of definition is it? That's a question. Ibn Abi Jamrah said it was specifically to the Arabs on the Arabian Peninsula only, after the Hujjah had been established on them. And then there's a khilaf about what the Arabian Peninsula was. Some said it was the Hijaz only, Tihama, Mecca, and Medina. And then the rest of the Arabian Peninsula, you could leave them. There were Jews on the Arabian Peninsula well into the 9th century. It's a historical fact. Ibn Ishaq says that in the Khalifa of Uthman ibn Affan, this is after Omar, who it's claimed that he dispelled all the Jews from the Hijaz. Ibn Ishaq says that in the Khilafah of Uthman, Safiya was visiting her Jewish relatives in Medina on the Sabt. Somebody accused her of being still hiding her Judaism. Astaghfirullah. So it's just, this is a human reality. She's a from our Ummahat. And Uthman asked her about it. He just wanted to dispel the rumor. She said that they're my relatives and I visit them. Saturday's the best day to visit them. Like she wasn't observing Sabt in secret, like the Sabbath. So that's a good example. And then in the Shafi'i madhab, and this is very important, the Shafi'i madhab was the only madhab that did not acknowledge the right of mushrikeen to worship. The other madhabs do. So the Hanafi and the Maliki madhab, and to be fair, the Shafi'is always used the Hanafi and Maliki rulings. They never applied that. But Imam Shafi'i saw that jihad was for izadat shirk, like to get rid of shirk. The Malikis and the Hanafis accept pagans as part of Ahlul Dhimma. So a Buddhist or a Hindu or an idol worshipper could actually pay the Dhimma and live under Muslims. And the Prophet did not destroy any house of worship. He purified the idols. But historically, the Muslims did not destroy Hindu temples. I mean, there's periods where you had mobs and things like that, but it was never a policy. Again, al-iktifa bil-juz'i wal-i'rad 'an al-kulli. So here it says, الَّذِينَ قَالَ لَهُمُ النَّاسُ. That was one man who said that. So there's an example. This is in Arabic rhetoric. This is called, you have synecdoche in English rhetoric. In Arabic rhetoric, you have what's called إطلاق الكل على البعض. To use the whole to mean the part. This is a rhetorical device in the Quran. And we know that was only one person, but the Quran uses nas. And it's rhetorically, الَّذِينَ قَالَ لَهُمَ النَّاسُ إِنَّ النَّاسَ. There's a rhetorical embellishment there for doing that. So Imam al-Juwayni, Imam al-Haramain said, jihad is only for the Imam or his the representative, right? So this is what we were just talking about. So if you look at this diagram here, this will explain to you. So you have the asbab, which are the legal causes. You have the impediments, the mawani', and then you have the conditions. And so the khitab al-takdeef, what are called prescriptive injunctions, are either obligations, prohibitions, or permissibilities, things that are permitted. Those are the three. They go into 5 categories, and we talked about this. So every ruling goes under one of 5 categories. And then you have what are called the rukhas and the azaim. Those are part of khitab al-wada', because you yourself have to determine that, whether it's permissible to use the rukhsa. So for instance, if you really fear getting sick, you can go from water to tayammum. But when there's water, the wujud al-ma mani'un li-istikhdam tayammum. So when water is present, like that's enough water to do wudu easily. I could probably do 2 or 3 wudus with that. And I learned to do that in the desert where they really value water. But you don't need a lot of water to do wudu. As long as that's there, I cannot do tayammum. But, this is very interesting. If the nearest place for water is 3 or 4 minutes away from here, and I've got 2 minutes to pray Asr before Maghrib comes in, I do tayammum. Because the obligation of prayer overrides going and finding water when I'm going to miss the prayer. So there's an example where you have to determine that. And this is what's called tahqiq al-manat. in usul. تحقق المناط. You are the one that will realize whether you can fast, if you're too sick to fast. I mean, sometimes you can use a doctor, but sometimes you can't. You're the one that will realize whether or not you've traveled far enough to do traveling prayers, taqsir. These are all things that we have to do. So, and then you have what's called al-waqi' outside of you. And so the text and the context have to harmonize. You cannot divorce the text from the context. And I'll give you some examples before we end, just to because they're very important for you to understand this. What I'm hoping out of this, and this is something I'm still working on. This book is a very complex book. I really ulama have a hard time with this book. It's written at a very, very sophisticated level in usul. And had I not been able to read it with Shaykh Abdullah bin Bay, I probably would have missed a good deal of it. But understanding this is extremely important for modern Muslims. We have to understand the level of sophistication of our Sharia. We have to understand the needs of our time, and we have to understand the importance of developing a fiqh al-waqi', a jurisprudence of reality. We've got insane youngsters out there that are declaring jihad on the West, right? And potentially setting our community up for nuclear annihilation. And if you think I'm joking, there's a book called The End of Faith, which was a #1 New York Times bestseller by Sam Harris. One of the chapters in there was arguing that we may have to have a preemptive nuclear strike against Muslims that will kill tens of millions of people. And he said in that book, but unfortunately, if it comes down to us or them, it's us. Now that is profoundly shocking, but if, I'm just giving you a scenario. If some Russians, and trust me, there are many disgruntled Russian generals about the Cold War and what happened and what America did to bring down the Soviet Union and things like this. If somebody smuggled a nuclear weapon and gave it to a Muslim group, we have a fatwa from an insane quote-unquote scholar from Saudi Arabia who's in jail now in Saudi Arabia on the permissibility of using nuclear weapons against the kuffar. Right? This is how crazy it is. La qadar Allah, we should pray, may Allah protect us from any of these things. But this is the situation we're in. We have insane Muslims out there that have no understanding of the world that they're living in. War today, I am absolutely convinced that if our Prophet ﷺ was here today, he would be the biggest anti-war advocate, because he constantly was trying to avoid conflict. And this was at a time when you could do very little harm to large numbers of people simply because of the lack of technology. Now you can annihilate. And people saw this who came to the RAS a few years ago, where I showed just the numbers since Napoleon's invasion of the Muslim world, the numbers of Muslims that have been killed and the numbers of people that have been fighting Muslims. And it's about 99 to 1. For every one person, now it's even higher, it's more like 10,000 to 1. We had in Afghanistan over 1 million people die. The Russians lost about 30,000. In Iraq, we had over 1 million people die. The Americans lost about 5,000. And on and on and on. Napoleon lost a few hundred soldiers at the Battle of the Pyramids. The Mamluks lost 20,000 that day. In the Battle of Omdurman, the English lost a handful of soldiers. They had Gatling guns. And the Mahdi's troops, tens of thousands died. This is the reality. And so, but if we don't understand the reality that we're in, I mean, one of my favorite quotes from Dr. King was, even if I wasn't against violence on moral principle, because he was committed to nonviolence, he said I'd still be against it pragmatically, given our circumstances. In other words, the man knows how to deal with violence. If you want to be violent with this civilization, you're giving them a great excuse to annihilate you. Because this civilization, Bernard Lewis said that Europeans and Western peoples in general forget that the reason that they have had so much control over this planet is because they have mastered the art of killing large numbers of people. It's as simple as that. And at a time when major changes have happened in the West, intellectually, the fact that you have such a profound attempt to overcome their racism, these are very advantageous to other peoples, that we have to encourage this evolution and not create a kind of race war scenario. We have to be very careful. We have to understand the mentality of the people that we're up against as a community. There are many, many changes, and all of you in this room, the vast majority of you represent those changes of allowing large numbers of immigrants to come into these countries that were settled by white people. Things are changing, and we have to be very, very strategic in terms of where we want to go. We have to be very strategic and understand that these are immense opportunities for creating a much more harmonious planet, as opposed to a planet with more belligerence. Because wars are untenable in the modern era. 90% of the victims of war are women, children, and non-combatant men. That's the reality. Civilians. Those are the victims of war. It's not the old days where you went out on Uhud or Badr, right? With nobility and a handful of people were killed. Or even the great Persian armies going against the Byzantine armies. No, it's aerial bombardment. That's the reality. So the disconnect between fulfilling commands and prohibitions and the consideration of harm and benefit. Now here, these are the 4 values that our scholars have identified. That you have hikmah, wisdom, justice, mercy. And justice and mercy you can't simply focus on justice. This whole idea that Muslims is all about justice. We have to remember that our religion it doesn't begin Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim al-Adal al-Muntaqim. Bismillah al-Adal al-Muntaqim. Right? That's not how the Quran begins. It doesn't begin in the name of God, the just, the avenger of wrongs. That's not how the Quran begins. It begins Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. If we forget, it didn't say Ma arsalnaka illa adlan aw adalatan lil alamin. We only sent you as a justice for all the world. That's not what it says. And I challenge any Muslim to tell me that they're going to ask God for justice for themselves. And that's the problem with our species. We want justice for everybody but ourselves. We want mercy for ourselves, but everybody else, give him what he deserves, Ya Allah. But we don't want what we deserve. Right? Nobody on Arafah is saying, oh Allah, give me what I deserve. Take me to account for my sins. Be just with me. No Muslim in his right mind. If he is, he's insane. And hopefully Allah won't do the answer his prayers because Rubi anhu al-qalam. But no Muslim in his right mind would ask for that. So we have to have more mercy. I want to see social mercy movements. Muslims should be spreading mercy and helping people and being benevolent and building hospitals and serving the poor and going into the inner cities and helping elevate people that have been degraded because of social circumstances that are very often grossly unjust. And then benefit, maslahah. So, now, just to give you some examples. Umar accepted charity from Arabian Christians and the Himirite Jews and the Magians of Tamim. He called it sadaqah as opposed to jizya because they were like, we're Arabs, we're not Byzantines, we don't want to pay jizya. So Umar said, just give sadaqah. He said, we'll call it sadaqah. Sheikh Abdullah has proven in a work called America's Declaration, which is online, proven, and it was over 250 scholars signed on to this. It was looked at by many people. Nobody's written a refutation of it. He proved that jizya is one modality. There are other ways that we can interact with people, and he argues in that the most appropriate way is using the Sahifa of Medina, which was the original intent of the Prophet ﷺ. So the gift jizya was what the Muslims used for the Byzantines. But Abdul Malik ibn Marwan paid the Byzantines tribute money to guard the borders for him. So the Imam has a lot of flexibility in these things. But this is the Mabda al-Am, this is the Qa'idah, which is oddly enough in Surah Al-Anfal, which is the chapter of war games. وَإِن جَنَحُوا لِلسَّلْمِ فَاجْنَحْ لَهَا وَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ إِنَّهُ هُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ. So if they incline towards peace, you should incline towards it. And what's interesting is immediately after it said, وَإِن يُرِيدُوا أَن يَخْدَعُوكَ فَإِنَّ حَسْبُكَ اللَّهِ. If they're only doing it out of trickery, Allah's enough for you. In other words, don't let that prevent you from inclining towards peace. Allah will deal with them if they're being treacherous or trickery. So this is about the Charter of Medina. And this is about understanding the context of the Sharia, the broad context related to the environment of revelation. This and the usulis take into consideration. There's a principle, that umum al-lafz أو خصوص السبب لا ينفي اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد. That the العبرة في عموم اللفظ لا في خصوص السبب. That you consider the general statement of the ayah and not the specific reasons for its revelation. That is true most of the time, not all of the time. There are times when the sabab is taken into. I have a whole book only on that subject, on when the sabab is taken into consideration. And I'll give you an example. One of the things that Imam al-Qarafi says in al-Furuq is you have to, and this is something that Imams have always understood, but he really goes into great detail about this. The Prophet ﷺ is many things. He's many things. He's a prophet, but he's also a general. He's also a statesman. He's a ruler. He's a father. He's a mufti. And he's a qadi. The hadiths all have to be taken into consideration given what is the description of the Prophet when he's speaking. I'll give you one example of that. Hind came to the Prophet ﷺ and she said, Ya Rasulullah, Abu Sufyan, rajulun shahihun. Right? He's stingy. And he's not giving me what I need. So the Prophet ﷺ said, خُذِي مِن مَالِهِ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. Take from his wealth what would be appropriate for your socioeconomic circumstances. As a woman of your stature, take the amount that you need to live in accordance with your stature. Imam Malik said he was speaking as a qadi here, not as a general fatwa for women. Abu Hanifa said no, he was speaking as a mufti, as a general fatwa. So Malik said women can't do that. Just take the money of the qadi has to look into the situation. That's without his permission. So there's an example of the Prophet ﷺ is speaking. Is he a qadi here or is he a mufti? There's a khilaf about that, but there are many situations where the Prophet is speaking specifically to one person and the hadith does not apply to other people. There are many examples of that in the hadith. And so that's one of the problems with modern Muslims is that they read hadith and they don't realize that this hadith is not a general rule. It was specific for a specific situation. Many examples of that. So one of the things about the Arabian Peninsula, it had no pacts, there was no system of government, everything was based on tribal relations. It was also a war of all against all. And so, if you look at, like the ayah to say, those verses that deal with jihad and things like that, they have to be understood within the context in which they were revealed. There were no international agreements, there were no boundaries. I'll give you an example. If there was not the type of global situation, and it's by far not the ideal one, but it is the one we have. And we have to be grateful for it, because order is better than chaos. The global order as it stands now prevents certain countries from just gobbling up other countries. So Singapore is not gobbled up by Malaysia, even though Singapore arguably was originally part of Malaysia, and the British kind of created Singapore because they wanted a port there. But Singapore is a very small country, it doesn't have an army, and a country could just, and I'm not saying Malaysia would do that, but I'm saying that the order that we have does not allow a country like Malaysia to maybe have that. Or Saudi Arabia to just go into Qatar, invade Qatar. Or Iraq to go into Kuwait. Or Morocco to go into the Sahara. Or Mauritania, because it wants the minerals. I'm not saying they would do this. I'm just saying that in the past, this is the type of world we lived in. China, right? I mean, Japan conquered all Singapore, Malaysia, Korea. They were all under Japanese control. Many people were, horrible things happened during that period. So we have a type of global order that is far from the best possible. It's the one that Allah has given us. And people that want to end it, we should just be careful for what we wish for. Because we don't know we believe we have a benevolent Lord. And this might be the best thing for us or what we deserve. We don't know. But we should be very careful at wanting to just tear things down, because we see what happens when things are told down. And I'll be the first to condemn the wrongs of my country. I mean, there are terrible things that we've done of late. But there's also many positive things as well. Just the CDC alone is a great blessing to have people that monitor all the outbreaks, because the large numbers of people can die with that. Even Tahir ibn Ashur says that it's more appropriate to believe that La ikraha fid-din abrogates all the verses about that would indicate otherwise, because it's very late. It's in Surah Al-Baqarah. And then this is a major problem, just people that still want empire, and I think in a lot of ways the pre-modern world was a more, I think there were a lot of very positive things about these great empires, and certainly the nation state has its own set of problems. But the nation state is the reality of our time, and to remove the nation state would cause a greater fitna, and this is one of the things that we should be aware of. So we have these people that think this is how it should all be, and it's just simply not the case. So anyway, that's that. And in conclusion, I wanted just to look at a few things that relate to our situation. One of them is what's known as bid'at al-tark. This idea that the Prophet ﷺ, Inna Allah farada fara'ida wa hadda hududan. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala set down these fara'id, and He set down these hudud, and gave us these commands, and then He told us, harama ashya'a fala tantahikuha. Like he prohibited certain things and told us not to do those. And then وَسَكَتَ عَنْ أَشْيَاءَ, like He was silent about certain things. رَحْمَةً لَكُمْ, لا نسيان أو غير نسيان, as a mercy to you, not out of forgetfulness. فلا تبحثوا عنها. Don't ask about those things. لا تسألوا عن أشياء تبدأ لكم تسؤكم. Don't ask about things that if you get the answer, it's going to bother you. So, tark is where the Prophet ﷺ did not say anything about something. There are some scholars that believe that also al-ashya al-tahrim, things are prohibited until they're proven to be permissible. That's not the dominant opinion. The dominant opinion is things are permissible until proven otherwise. And so a lot of things that are called bid'ah now have to do with tark, the fact that the Prophet ﷺ or the Sahaba didn't do it. And so for instance, the mawlid, there's undeniably no doubt that nobody celebrated the mawlid as a day. Everybody was happy the Prophet ﷺ was born. Every day of their life the Muslims were happy. So in that way they celebrated the mawlid in that he was born. But the idea of setting aside a day, the 12th of Rabi' al-Awwal for most around the world, and just having a celebration of, like, people give sweets to the children, they feed people, they have gatherings, they do insha or talk about his fada'il. They didn't do it, but in the 7th century it was an innovation, and people saw it was an Egyptian ruler that actually started it. The ulama saw it as a good thing, and it became a practice in the Muslim community. The idea of doing it all the time, I don't know. Those things kind of tend to, I think they can move into an area that becomes questionable, I think. But those are some practices, people do them, and the best thing is, at best, it's a khilaf issue and just to leave people alone. I personally, I think the time for the Mawlid is in the Rabi' al-Awwal to celebrate it. Otherwise, we should be happy the Prophet ﷺ was born every day of our life. We pray on him every day. You should do salah ala Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Those are all celebrating his life and the fact that he was born and that he guided us. But doing, like, do you get together once a week and read a Mawlid text like a Barzanji or something like that? Some people do that. I don't do that. I don't encourage it at Zaytuna with the students. Some of the students want to do that. I don't encourage it. For me, the path of the students of knowledge is to study, memorize the Quran if you haven't memorized it, memorize the Hadith, memorize the books of fiqh, the mutun. That's the way, the path of the students of knowledge. Devotional people can do other things. There's a Hadith, where the Prophet ﷺ is a Sahih Hadith about doing all his devotional practices as prayer on the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ told him to do it, and if he did it, that yukfa hammuka, that all your anxieties will be taken care of, and your sins will be forgiven. So you can make all your practice extraneous to the fard, prayer on the Prophet ﷺ, by the permission of the Prophet ﷺ, and it's a very beautiful thing to do, and the people that I know that do that as a practice are some of the most amazing people I've ever met. So, but to say that this is a bid'ah muharrama is very problematic. And in fact, Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayyah recently issued a fatwa that it's mujma' ala ibahatihi. It's an agreed upon permissible thing, because the Ummah agreed on it. Nobody in the history of the Ummah after it became instituted ever condemned it. And so that means that an ijma' happened. So that he made an argument that it's ijma'. So that's an example where we need to set aside these differences. Allah said, "Aqim ad-din wa la tafarraqu." Establish the religion and don't go into sectarianism. It's a prohibition to be sectarian. And the only way that you can have large numbers of people living in harmony is to recognize diversity, and that there's going to be ikhtilafat. Does that mean we accept all differences of opinion? Absolutely not, because some differences of opinion are simply outside of the pale of acceptability. So people that believe that there was a prophet after the Prophet ﷺ, we don't accept that. If you say there's a prophet after the Prophet ﷺ, that's not acceptable. So that's a khilaf where we can't say, oh, that's okay, you believe that, that's nakhtalif fi. If people say Jesus was God, we say that's unacceptable. So there are ikhtilafat that are unacceptable, but the Sharia is very vast, and they said about Imam al-Maqsidi that he had such vast knowledge that he rarely condemned anybody, because he would always find an opinion. Maybe he's following so-and-so. So that's really important to remember, that tark is not a proof. The fact that the Prophet did not do something does not mean that it's prohibited. And Imam al-Qarafi and others divided bid'ah into 5 categories. So there's bid'ah hasana, there's bid'ah wajiba, bid'ah hasana, there's bid'ah mubaha. Right? I mean, it's a bid'ah to eat till you're satiated, because we know the first people didn't do that. As an act of ibadah, they did it. If you want to be a vegetarian, there's an argument for vegetarians just based on the unethical nature of meat. If you don't have access to free-range, organic meat, there's a real argument that it's inhumane the way these animals are being treated. You don't really want to participate in that. The Prophet ﷺ permitted vegetarianism. Abu al-Lahm, Amr Abu al-Lahm, that's his name, a Sahabi. Amr, the man who refused meat. And the Prophet ﷺ accepted that from him. So if you want to be a vegetarian and somebody says I'm a vegetarian, leave them alone. Haram, Hinduism. Just relax. You just leave people alone. So now, if they say I'm a vegetarian for spiritual or religious reasons, because I think eating meat is anything with a face you shouldn't eat, right? Now you're in the realm of bid'ah. But if you say, I know a Jewish rabbi who doesn't eat meat because he believes it's unethical the way animals are being treated. So he's not against meat per se, but he feels that more of us should stop eating meat. We also know that beef in particular, like I would definitely not eat beef if you can avoid it, because beef is one of the number 1 causes for global warming. That's well known. The methane from cows is one of the major causes for global warming. And again, like I said, the Prophet never ate beef. So we're sheep people. Sheeple. So, and then another thing also is this, what's called isnad al-majazi. This is another obsession with certain people because they don't understand rhetoric. They didn't study rhetoric. You can say certain things. There's a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said, whoever says mutarna bino'i kad kafara, he has made kufr, who says we were given rain because of this ascension of this star. Right? That is only if he intended. If he believed that, you can actually say that in Arabic. It's a type of majaz mursal. It's permitted to do that. You can say that the Prophet ﷺ guided us. You don't have to say Allah guided. Allah guided us, but He guided us through the Prophet. So He's a means. So you can use that. The Quran says both. إِنَّكَ لَا تَهْدِي مَنْ أَحْبَبْتَ. You don't guide who you want. Like Allah guides whomever He pleases. But then the Quran also says إِنَّكَ لَا تَهْدِي إِلَى صِرَاطٍ مُسْتَقِيمٍ. You guide to a straight path. Allah says the Prophet guides to a straight path. The Prophet doesn't guide in reality. Haqiqatan, it's Allah who guides. But He used the means of the Prophet to guide people. So in that way, the Prophet is a guide. He's al-Hadi. That's a name of God, but it's one of the asma mushtaraka. It's some names are not shared, like Rahman. You can't take that name, but Hadi, you can take that name because it's mushtaraka. Because you can be a guide, not haqiqatan, but as sabab. You're a sabab for guidance. The Mahdi is a guide, right? So that's really important. And then finally, fiqh al-aqaliyat. I want to just read this last section about, because we're aqaliyat, and these are some really important things. He says, for instance, a woman who becomes Muslim and her husband's a Christian or a Jew or something else, The vast majority of scholars say that faskhul nikah, that this marriage is over. إما فورا أو بعد انقضاء العدة, either immediately or after the iddah is over, the period for the 3 periods. And the proof is the ayah الممتحنة, فلا ترجعوهن إلى الكفار لا هن حل لهم ولا هم يحلون لهن. That's an ayah of Quran. So don't return them to the disbelievers. They're not permitted for them, and they're not permitted for them. First of all, that related to the mushrikeen, right? So that's another. But he said, Islam al-Mar'a, that the Majlis al-Urabi decided that if a woman becomes Muslim, she can stay with her husband even though he follows another religion. And they give their proofs for it. So that's something really important to know, because that is a very real situation. And people can leave Islam if they're told they have to do that. And then another one is mortgages. Right? So Shaykh Abdullah said that if you're in a situation where you have children and it's very difficult to rent, then it's permitted, according to some opinions of the Hanafi school and of Imam al-Nakha'i about riba in Dar al-Harb, that it's permitted to do that, because the prohibition is in taking a riba is a greater prohibition, because you can give your money to لا ينهاكم عن الذين لم يقاتلوا الدين ولم يخرجوكم من دياركم أن تبروهم وتقسطوا إليهم. If you look at the tafsir of that ayah, it's جعلوا قسطا من أموالكم, to give them your money, right? So that's and like I said, that's not the majority of ulama. The majority of ulama put them both ways. But he said, now can you do it to become wealthy and start buying up houses and doing this? Some Muslims did that and really suffered when 2008 hit. I mean, there were Muslims that were buying in the U.S. several houses, and they had all these balloon mortgages on them, and then they lost everything. So that's an example. And I mean, I would encourage using the Muslim mortgage houses that are owned and operated by Muslims, because they pay zakat, hopefully they give charity and things like that. But in certain situations, they're cheating people. You know, I'm not saying all of them, but I'm saying some of them, they actually make it more expensive than the conventional mortgages. So it becomes like all these hiyal, shari'iyah, and they take advantage of simple Muslims, gullible Muslims doing that. So those things, that's a very tough one, but that's the position that you put forward. And then finally, about like giving money to taking money, قبول التبرع من الأفراد أو المؤسسات أو الحكومات، مسلمة كانت أو غير مسلمة، حتى ولو غلب على ظننا أنها أموال غير مشروعة من جهة النظر الإسلامية، إلا إذا كانت محرمة العين مثل الخمر والخنزير، وذلك لأن قبول التبرع منهم بمنزلة قبول الهدية وإذا تبرع منهم. So he's saying that we can accept money from organizations, like for instance at Zaytun we accepted a grant from the Templeton Foundation. So Muslims, if they're able to find sources from non-Muslims that can help them do their work and things like that, it's very important to do that. In terms of accepting government funding, I mean, obviously a lot of Muslims are very sensitive to that, but here's what I would argue. All of us pay taxes. And so I think our community, if we have opportunities to get, if grants are available from the governments, we have opportunities to do that. If they don't compromise us in terms of our principles, and also if they don't put stipulations on them to do things that would compromise our principles, then I think Muslims should be more sophisticated about these situations, because all of our organizations are suffering from lack of funds. I don't know any Muslim organization in the West that doesn't have a serious funding crisis. So whatever we can do to strengthen our community, as long as it's halal and permitted, we should do that. And so our religion is a pragmatic religion, it's an intelligent religion, it's not a simpleton's religion, and it's not a foolish religion. So that's very important. And there's other things about this that he goes into many, many different things. So I'll just, let's see. Yeah. I'll answer some of these questions. How much time do I have? Is it out? Oh, they are? Okay. Let me just go through a few of these, because people asked them yesterday. You spoke about the marriage's primary purpose is children. But a lot of people, they don't have children. They go through all these extreme measures to try to have children. What about the other purposes of marriage? And I would just say that children is not the only reason to get married. And some people will not have children. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says very clearly in the Quran that He makes whomever He pleases barren. It might be a great blessing not to have children. In your particular case, you never know. Allah knows. You don't know. It's better to accept the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in those types of situations. In terms of certain things that you can do, yams are very good for the ladies. The most fertile place in the entire world is Nigeria. And they eat yams. In fact, yams are, and there's a lot of evidence that yams actually do increase that. So try yams, and then also don't get, the worst thing you can do to a woman is like make her feel something's wrong if she's not having children. And it can also be on the man's side as well. I mean, we know sperm counts are dropping pretty rapidly. So, what were you going to say? So, can a Muslim man marry a Hindu woman or man? I mean, the Hindus are not, they don't go under the category. The Hindu religion is, I believe, must have come out of a true prophetic tradition. I mean, I would find it very hard to believe that a religion as sophisticated as Hinduism could have simply emerged from the minds of men. However, it's a very ancient religion. From our perspective, it's not one of the religions that we were told are from the Ahlul Kitab, the people of the book. Even though they do have a book, and there have been ulama in the past that argue that they are a type of people of the book. But the idea that they're mushrikun is also a false belief. Hinduism is a monotheistic religion, but common people, the Brahmin gave common people these symbols to focus on, and then often that led to shirk. But the Vedic scriptures are very clearly monotheistic. But I don't know of any permission to marry Hindus personally. I don't, but I would leave that to the ulama of South Asia, where they're much more familiar with that. But I don't know of any permissibility to marry Hindus. I did have a Pakistani woman come to me who was very distraught, and she said her son was marrying a Hindu who was converting, and she was really distraught about it because, as you know, in Pakistan. And India generally, the Muslims, although this is the great motif of Indian films, right? These people falling in love from different religions and things like that. But I told her, no, be happy. I said, why? He said, he's marrying a girl, first of all. So that's a real reason just to say bushara on that. Because, seriously, I mean, we have to be grateful because people now are getting married with, I don't know if you call it marriage, but that is a real concern now of people, because there's just so much promiscuity, and there's also homosexuality, which is prohibited in our religion. So, and then the second thing I said, is she Brahmin? And she said yes. I said, okay, well that's good, because they study, they're very committed to education, so that's good. So just try to see the blessings in things, And she became Muslim. They're very happy with her now, so it turned out really well. She's a wonderful girl, and the family's very accepting of them. And then, to be honest with you, Hindus from South Asia have incredible cultural dovetailing with Muslims. There's so many things that are similar. So if the Hindu wants to become Muslim, then it's a good thing. We should encourage Hindu conversion and welcome them into the community. Indians are amazingly devotional people. They really are. They're some of the most devotional people on the planet. I mean, atheism just does not fly in South Asia. And Africans are like that too. I mean, Africans are wonderfully devotional people. Africans, no matter how bad things get, they will not turn on God, really. And historically, that was the case amongst the African peoples that were here. Incredible devotion despite everything. If you want to read one of the most incredible stories that you'll ever read the story of Charles Albert Tindley, Tindley. He's an African-American slave, born into slavery, had such a thirst for knowledge. He never spent a day in school, but he learned how to read, like tricking people to teach him how to read from newspapers. He ended up going to a Christian church, a white church, and fortunately the minister was an enlightened minister and welcomed him in, even though churches were segregated. As a young boy, he learned Hebrew. He convinced a rabbi to teach him Hebrew. He learned Hebrew, and then he learned Greek by correspondence. He ended up becoming one of the most influential preachers in the late 19th and early 20th century. And some people will know him from a hymn that he wrote called "We Shall Overcome." But really, it's just one of the most extraordinary human beings that ever lived. And so you have amazing stories like that against incredible odds. So we should be so grateful that we have all these opportunities when peoples of the past did not, and yet some of them. How can we help the Uyghurs? I mean, there are organizations. I actually tried to convince. I'm on the board of a Religious Freedom Institute, and I was trying to convince them that we should be boycotting Chinese goods, because that's the best place to hit people. What's happening to the Uyghurs is just really horrendous. I hate to say this, but unfortunately, a lot of this is due to these extremists, because traditionally the Chinese actually treated, the Muslim minorities, I'm not going to say, ideal situation, but relatively well. They were exempt from the one-child policy. They had the state imams, and it was very much controlled by the state. But once you start getting these extremists coming in, and you started getting separatist movements and people, they've really come down heavy-handed on the whole community, which is totally unfair and evil. But again, this is part of the problem with we've got this segment of our community. It's a very small segment, but they cause massive problems for our community. But I really feel like we should be boycotting Chinese goods because what's happening? I mean, over 1 million people have been interned. They have these re-education camps. It's just a horrific situation as far as we can tell. And my concern and my fear, and I mentioned this over 10 years ago to people, my concern is that there are elements, very nefarious elements, that will use the Muslims in the same way the Afghanis were used to bring down the Soviet Union. That they'll use the Muslims, start supplying them with weapons, and getting resistance movement, because this creates an incredible drain on an economy to have a war. Immense suffering would occur if that happens. I really hope it doesn't. It's about unveiling of the unseen world. I don't know about that. We're here in the seen world for now. The unveiling in the unseen world happens when you go into the dream world, if you have true dreams. In terms of here, you don't really want the veils to be lifted, because a lot of people, when they are lifted, they go mad. That's why you see people talking to beings around them. So I would be very wary to go into any things where people are telling you, you can do these dhikrs and things will happen and things like that. I would be very careful about that, because that's not from sound tradition. The Prophet ﷺ, some of the Sahaba did see angels, we know that as miracles, and they certainly had very profound spiritual experience. Some of you have probably had profound spiritual experience, but I have always argued, will continue to argue, that this is a spiritual experience, that just life is a spiritual experience. Just open yourself up to the profound experience of consciousness, because consciousness is at essence an immaterial reality. It's a spiritual reality. We experience consciousness through physicality, and in that way the materials are necessary for consciousness to occur, but consciousness itself, language itself, all of these things are emanating from the unseen world. So we are having spiritual experiences in every instant. I'm concerned that our scholars will no longer speak the truth out of fear of people and fear of attacks. There's a lot of bullying in our time, and I feel scholars are being bullied if they don't say what the people want to hear. This is a big problem. Some scholars, certain scholars fall into what's called the zeitgeist. And the zeitgeist means the spirit of the times. Like right now, the zeitgeist is to be pro homosexuality, to be pro-abortion, to be pro this, that, and the other. So we have to stick to our guns. It's a secular society. We respect the right of other people to do what the laws of the secular land permit them to do. But we have to stick to our own truth. And so one would hope, there's a lot of scholars being attacked, and it's very unfortunate, but it also goes with the territory. Scholars always are going to, a wise American once said, if you don't want critics, don't do anything, don't say anything, but above all, don't be anything. So, if you're going to do anything in the world, you're going to get critics. They say that children learn to walk before they can speak as a mercy from God, because if they could speak before they could walk, they'd never learn to walk, because the adults would keep saying, just give it up, you're never going to learn how to do that. Because they keep getting up, fall down, get up, fall down. But that's what we have to do. We just, I tell people that I work with, we need to put on blinders, like a horse. You just focus, put on blinders, don't get distracted. Just don't get distracted, because they're going to pull you this way or that way. If you start reading, Bob Dylan once was reading an article about himself, and he said, thank God I'm not me. So just recognize that people are going to say what they say. You have to know who you are, and you have to know what your intention is. People are going to attack you, and they're going to. Sidi Ahmed Zarruq says that, commenting on the hikam of Ibn Ata'illah says, متى آلمك عدم إقبال الناس عليك أو توجههم بالذنب إليك فارجع إلى علم الله فيك. That's a hikmah in Ibn Ata'illah. Whenever you're pained by the lack of respect that people show you, or by their censoring you, like attacking you, return to the knowledge of God in you. Sidi Ahmed Zarruq says you do it 3 ways. First of all, recognize that it's probably your own sinfulness that brought that on you. So you probably did something. Allah is removing sins by having people attack you, because when people attack you, they're giving you their hasanat. So just be grateful. But they're going to attack. If you're out there, any of imams that are here, people are going to criticize you, attack you. Just try to be upright. And know, if you know the hukm of Allah in what you're doing, and your ijtihad tells you this is the right thing to do and this is permissible. People criticize Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayya recently for his forum. which has had a huge impact on evangelical Christians. You can read, there's an article that one of the top evangelical pastors from Texas, he's got a huge megachurch in Northwood, Texas, Bob Roberts. And he wrote an article about the transformative effect that it had on all these pastors that went to the forum. So but anyway, Shaykh Abdullah, somebody asked him about, people are attacking you. And how should we respond? They're attacking us for even attacking. He said, well, there's one group that are just ignorant of the hukum of Allah, because what we're doing is permitted. It's jaiz. He's an usuli scholar. That's how he views it. He says it's jaiz. You shouldn't condemn people doing permitted things. The other group maybe have some ideological agendas, or they have access to grind. He said those people, you just have to ignore them. Is it possible to create a parallel interest-free society? There are some Catholics that have tried to do that. You can do that with great difficulty. Like I said, there's some Catholics that have done that. I know people in California, not Muslims, that will not use credit cards because they don't believe in it. They don't have bank accounts. I mean, there are people that have that level of commitment. It's very difficult, but you can do it. There's a hadith in Bukhari that states that if a man calls his wife to bed and she refuses, the angels curse her until the next morning. I understand the wife's obligation to her husband. What I struggle to understand is how something of this nature can be deserving of the la'na of Allah and not receiving shafa'ah on the Day of Judgment. I mean, there's nothing about not receiving shafa'ah, but I mean, the hadith, which is actually, it's in al-Bukhari, and there's a version in Muslim as well, that ما دعا رجل امرأته إلى فراشه فأبت إلا لعنة الملائكة حتى تصبح كما قال. There's a couple different ways of relating, but a man won't call. فبات غضبانا. That's very important in the hadith. It says that he is angry. He goes to sleep angry at her. غضبانا. So what's important to note about that hadith, first of all, and Imam Nawawi and others, in Imam Nawawi's commentary on it, this is only a woman who has no excuse. So in other words, what she's doing is haram, because it's the haqq of the man. And so by depriving him of his haqq, you're doing something haram. The la'na is there are many examples of that in the hadith where it's a very strong zajar. It's really just saying, don't do this. You don't want to do this because it's haram. It's also not healthy. But there's some beautiful points to make out of that hadith. One, it's very clear that this idea of spousal rape, which does occur, is absolutely unacceptable. Because clearly the Prophet ﷺ said, فَبَاتَ غَضْبَانَ. Like he's upset about it, but he doesn't, if he had the right to just force her, the Prophet ﷺ would have said that, but he didn't. It was very important. So if she has an excuse, like I've got a headache, or something, if she has an excuse, a husband should be patient with her and understanding. She also there might be some conflict, like maybe the husband was really harsh with her in the day, and she's upset, and then he wants his qada al-watar, but she's still dealing with the earlier trauma. That situation is not really fair. So I think we have to be very careful. That's not a blanket hadith, or maybe he's been cruel to her or something. In the Maliki madhab, turn your back on a wife when she's speaking is grounds for divorce. Literally. In our books, if a woman is speaking and the husband just turns like to show, I'm not going to listen to you, that's actually adha. So the marital bond is a really important one. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say? وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. He put between you, وَمِنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا, from your own selves, mates. Right? لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا, that you find tranquility in your mate. The word in Arabic for house is maskan, the place of sakina. So I think it's very important to take that hadith with granus salis, as the Romans used to say, a grain of salt. Okay, last one and I'm done. In the past 2 years, there's been a visible shift in Muslims celebrating Christmas as a local cultural tradition. Yeah, I would not celebrate Christmas. It's I was raised in the Orthodox tradition. They don't celebrate Christmas on the 25th. It's January 6th. So there's a khilaf even about the Christmas. But 25th was Mithra's birthday. It was originally a Roman pagan god. So I would definitely not celebrate Christmas. But it is permissible to greet people of Christians. You can say Merry Christmas. Ibn Taymiyyah said that. So it's not made up. So show them the season spirit. Don't be like. If somebody says Merry Christmas to you, just Merry Christmas, Happy Holiday, whatever you want to say. But don't just be nice people, inshallah. Yeah, قُلُوا لِلنَّاسِ حُسْنًا. This conclusion. Am I going to see this group again? Oh, good. Okay, yeah, because I wanted to do just a wasiyah. I hope this has been beneficial to you. It was just an overview to kind of give you a sense of, one, the sophistication of the Sharia, but also the importance of understanding these principles to be able to just navigate in your own lives better. But may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inshallah give you all tawfiq. Please keep me in dua. This book out there is for sale. There's not very many, but I want to donate them. Is Asma here? Did she leave? Asma? No, not Asma from Australia. Asma, Purple Lady. Is Asma here? She left? Anyway, we want to donate. She has a women's shelter. That woman, she's a saint. I love that woman. She's just such an amazing lady. She's just very unassuming and just does her work quietly. So whatever you want to give for that, 25 and above. This is the latest run about you. There's only 15, but I'm going to donate whatever comes from that to Asma's little shelter. If you want to give any money to it, just give it to the people there, or Fawzan for the shelter. She's really worthy of help. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum.